Hey YouTube, Alex here in Da Nang, Vietnam, and I want to make a video talking about my top 5 introvert-friendly countries. I'm going to do these in reverse order. So number 5 is Thailand. I think Thailand is going to be my number 5 most introvert-friendly country. Thai people have a tendency to be non-confrontational. They're not looking for arguments. They're not looking to flip out. You don't see this hyper-reactivity that you see in the US where it feels like things are going to pop off at any moment, where tensions are running high, where people are isolated, where cluster B overreactivity seems to be at an all-time high. In most places I've lived throughout Thailand, things seem to get pretty quiet after around, say, 9, 10 p.m. at night. You're not having people out on the street playing loud music and with boomboxes. You're not hearing loud karaoke in the middle of the night. People have a sense of dignity in Thailand, and this translates to being considerate of others, trying to think about other people. I very rarely encounter somebody in Thailand pushing their opinion on you. Most Thai people are polite. Most Thai people have interacted with a foreigner at some point. Many Thai people work in the tourism industry, or they have friends or family that work in tourism. It's not going to be a big deal for them to interact with a tourist. Even in party settings where I've encountered Thai people having a good time, they're not screaming and shouting, trying to draw attention to themselves. They're not looking to be disruptive or inconsiderate. They really manage to have a great time. Outside of Bangkok and Chiang Mai, you're unlikely to hear construction in the early morning or late night hours. Part of this could be chalked up to the fact that you've got an aging population in Thailand, and there's not as much need for new housing. One of the things that I've noticed is that in Thailand, even if people cannot speak English and they know you can't speak Thai, they'll still try to help you. They will still try to help you sort through the issue. Unlike some other countries I've been to where they start barking in the US when it comes to customer service, they'll give you the runaround for an hour just to tell you they can't help you. Now, in the case of the US, they're trying to discourage people from using customer service, which fortunately doesn't seem to be an issue in many of the other countries I travel to. Number 4 is Peru. I last went to Peru about 3 years ago. Peru is perhaps the most introverted country in Latin America. You notice this in the Andean region. In Cusco especially, there isn't much of a nightlife scene. You're not going to have this, let's go out and have this wild night on the town. When I lived in Cusco, I found that it was easy to have quiet meals around the city, to be undisturbed. There are a couple of places where there are a lot of salespeople, mostly around the Plaza de Armas and around the bus depot. But aside from those two areas, you're not going to have people bugging you. You're not going to have people trying to trick you into coming to their bar, trying to talk you into buying something that you really don't need. I noticed in all but the most popular restaurants, service staff was very polite. Oh, you want this? Okay, got it. That was sufficient. They went back to the kitchen, put in my ticket. A little bit later, they brought me my food. Peruvian food is some of my favorite cuisine in the world. This is different than in some countries, one country in particular. I'm not going to name the country because I might want to go back there at some point, to be honest with you. I went to a restaurant in that country and the waitress asked if I wanted an adult beverage. No thanks, I don't want to drink. She asked me again. Oh, no thank you. She asked me again. In their language, I said, oh no. She asked me again. We repeat this an additional probably 4 times before I just got up and walked out. No, cancel my order, never mind. I don't want to drink, it's the middle of the day. I'm not going to change my mind if you ask me another 10 or 15 times. And she had this hurt look on her face. This is a decent restaurant. Entrees ran around $10 US. She wouldn't take no for an answer. You don't want to have to keep repeating yourself over and over again to somebody, even using their language, even pulling out the Translate app. If I say no, maybe twice should be the maximum amount of time I have to tell somebody no before it becomes pestering. It's nice the sun has been covered up by clouds. Number 3 is Singapore. Singapore is hyper-developed, comparable to London, except Singapore feels a lot safer than London. I was in London a year and a half ago, and there's definitely a difference there. You can't operate in the city with limited human contact. There's a lot of self-service type of businesses. It's very easy to use public transportation without a ton of assistance. It's fairly easy to navigate Singapore. I was in Singapore to visit about 4.5 2.5 years ago. Found it super easy. There's English signage everywhere. There was no time in which I had to ask for directions. I communicated with hotel staff with no issues. It's a very safe feeling country, perhaps the most safe feeling country I've ever been in. That was throughout the country. There's no areas where I felt in danger or at risk. I didn't really run around a lot at night because I spent a lot of time during the day exploring, so I was pretty tired at night when I was in Singapore. I didn't see anything that would make me feel like, okay, this area is fine during the day, but at nighttime, it's not a good idea. Security is very efficient in Singapore. I didn't really see that much security because it's just an unspoken rule that if you break the rules, they're going to handle it. It's quite refreshing compared to a place like San Francisco. You can see in the distance there the storms, and in that direction too. So in a city like Singapore, where labor is very expensive, people give off the vibe, hey, I'm trying to get things done, I'm trying to be efficient. You don't have this random people hanging around, not really seeming to have purpose. You don't see the loitering that you see in some cities that makes you feel unsafe. And you're not going to have these people approaching you, which as an introvert, I hate having to tell people, no, not interested, no, leave me alone, no, don't want to buy it, no, 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 which happens in some cities where people feel entitled to come up to you and offer you stuff. And I get it, people are struggling. It's not an efficient use of human capital to have people going around interrupting people, and it's a few steps away from begging at that point, let's be honest. Something they didn't know they didn't need. If you got some money to spend, you want a week-long trip, then I'd recommend Singapore. It's fairly dense. You can see a lot in a short time. Yes, it is going to be pricey, but if you're somebody who's introverted, you want to be left alone, you want to enjoy museums, the gorgeous architecture in peace. I wasn't ever disturbed when I was in Singapore, except for one occasion. In a few of the hawker centers, some of the vendors can be a little bit aggressive with their trying to sell you food. Hey man, come on, sit down, come eat here. Outside of those hawker centers, I never had any issues with people trying to get pushy with their sales tactics. The number 2 introvert-friendly country I'm going to mention here is Portugal. I found Portuguese people to be very respectful. They had this banter or friendliness among themselves. They weren't pushing you to join, to, hey, come into my restaurant, hey, come spend money. I really like that. When I go to a country, you don't have people, and it may be different in Lisbon, okay? To be fair, I was in the Algarve. In the Algarve, I didn't have people standing outside of their restaurant trying to bug you to come inside. I'm turned off by that. I don't like that. When I see that, I try to avoid that street. I try to avoid that district. I know some people will say, oh, it's just what you expect in a tourism area. That's not always the case. I've been to a lot of touristic areas throughout the world. Only some places tolerate those kinds of pushy sales tactics. I noticed the service in restaurants in the Algarve was friendly and polite, but not over the top like you see in the United States at times, where people are trying to do this song and dance because a lot of restaurants don't want to pay a living wage. Finally, the grocery store experience really sticks out to me in Portugal. I found that people would allow me to walk around the store. You're not getting followed by security like you are in some countries or cities. You're not seeing things like in San Francisco where everything is under lock and key. I felt super safe there. In fact, Portugal usually ranks really high as far as most peaceful countries in the world. In the Portuguese grocery store chain, Pingo Doce, I'd only interact with employees in a couple of scenarios. One, going up to the meat counter or the bakery counter, and then 2, when I check out. Even when you check out, they're very polite. They're not trying to prompt you, how's your day, with this fake over-the-top friendly service that really gets, I think, tiresome to some introverts in the United States. And the rain's starting to come down. I definitely want to go back to Portugal when I have the time and spare funds to do so. There's so much there for me to see. I want to see the north of the country near Porto. I get the sense it's going to have a similar vibe where people are very introspective. They have this rich inner world. All the people I dealt with in Portugal were honest. When I went to exchange money, when I went to get a SIM card at the airport, when I went to restaurants, things were straightforward. And I really liked that sense that I wasn't having to be on guard like I am in some countries where people are trying to push you into social interactions to manipulate money out of you. The number 1 country as far as my introvert-friendly travel destinations in in some cases expat destinations, is of course Japan. I am part Japanese. I think some of this is genetic. Similar to Singapore, a lot of East Asian people are more visual spatial in terms of learning. They're not learning from these mass group interactions. It's much more I like to read, I like to work with my hands, I like to figure things out at my own pace. You see that when you are in Japan, people do what they need to do without having to socialize. Now, people are social in Japan. There seems to be purpose in the socializing. It doesn't seem to be this instance where people are just wanting to spend a lot of time talking for no reason. It's similar to Singapore in that time is expensive. People are trying to get things done. People are not going to be rude, but they typically work long hours. They've got busy schedules. There's a lot of effort that goes into maintaining a developed country, a high trust society. Money changes hands really rapidly in Japan because you can expect you're not going to get ripped off. Throughout Japan, it's a high trust society. The introversion goes alongside that. You're not having to deal with inefficient systems where you have to go meet this guy and this guy's got a cousin that's going to help you get a deal on this thing. It's very easy to navigate Japan. They have English signage. Whenever I had to ask for directions, people had solid English that were working in the tourism industry. They weren't trying to sell me on a tour. They weren't trying to pretend they knew where I was trying to go. They were legitimately really helpful, but also expedient, trying to help me get to where I needed to go as quickly as possible. And I loved that about Japan. There's a lot I could say about Japan. The best roommate scenario I've ever had was with a Japanese man here in Thailand. Very respectful guy, super quiet. We could go hours and hours and hours without talking. It's a high contact society. So just by making eye contact, it's almost like we could understand each other on not what was said, but what was not said. That just made it super easy. I really enjoyed his company. He had a lot of great observations, really hardworking guy as well. Like, it shocked me how hardworking he was. I could tell he had a rich inner world. And even though we were very different, he was a really athletic guy, really into soccer and a lot of different sports activities. We just could connect on a very basic level because we could understand each other without having to use too many words and too much time. It's just so bizarre to me because I've had a lot of roommates in the US and normally it goes not very well at all. This guy I'd never met before, but we started talking about Japan. His parents were originally from the same island my grandmother was from. Just randomly met in a Facebook group because he was advertising a room there. Japanese people tend to be expedient in their communications. I found the society to be very insightful. I'd love to go back to Japan. It can be lonely at times. I like Japan a lot. I'm a fan of it as an introvert traveler. I think Japan is pretty hard to beat. As long as you follow the rules in Japan, you can get by without interacting with people. There's quite a few restaurants that cater to solo travelers, individuals. I went to quite a few restaurants where it seemed like locals in the neighborhood would come there alone and then they'd all get together and be talking and having a good time, and it didn't seem forced. Some places you go in the US, sometimes the socializing is forced. I didn't get that impression in Japan. I also didn't get a ton of hardcore upselling in Japan. In the US, anytime you interact with a business, they're trying to upsell you these days. I like that in Japan, they weren't trying to sell me on this, they weren't trying to sell me on that. They weren't trying to, oh, this is wrong, you need to buy this. Oh, that's wrong, you need to buy this. They certainly will allow you to upgrade, but they're not going to push it on you. They're not hardcore about it. One of the primary times I interact with somebody when it was their job to enforce the rules, like I accidentally wore my shoes into the dressing room at a clothing store. The attendant said, shoot. And I was like, what? She pointed at my shoes. Shoes. No shoes in the dressing room. That was clearly uncomfortable for her to have to say the rules are what makes that society work so well. It's what makes that society high trust. It's what saves people time of having to go through the rigmarole of explaining X, Y, and Z. Alongside that, when I rode a bus from the Kansai airport to the city center of Osaka, they did want to make sure I had my proper ticket. As soon as I showed them my ticket, I was free to go. You will have to keep an eye out for making sure you're following the rules, because if you don't, somebody is going to stop you. Also on the Shinkansen train, they're very cautious, careful to check every passenger to make sure they have fare. Wish they had that on BART in San Francisco, but that's a rare sight. So there's a trade-off there. There's a trade-off there for having the introversion, is that people are coming through in Japan to check that you're following the rules. I take that any day over the hassle of traveling in the US at times. So this has been 5 of my top countries for introvert travelers. Some of these would also apply to introvert would-be expats. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Do you agree with these 5 countries? I think Japan is the most most overt? I want to know what you think. Let's discuss it down below. Have you traveled to these countries? Have you found them to be introvert friendly? It's always interesting to get your opinion. Give us a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Finally, if you haven't already, if you want to see more content like this, subscribe to the channel down below, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.